first book I read this year was The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. I gave this book 3.5 stars. And although I enjoyed it and it was a nice, easy, chick-litty read, I much preferred The Switch by the same author, which I read the previous year. Book number 2 was In Little Stars by Linda Green. It's the first book of this author I've read, although I believe she's written quite a lot of books. I gave this 5 stars. This was my book of January. Absolutely loved it and highly recommended. Can't quite remember what it's about because, frankly, it was 12 months ago and my memory's not that great anymore, but highly recommended nonetheless. Book number 3 was Eat, Drink, Run by Bryony Gordon. I thought this was going to be a bit of an inspirational book. It's an autobiographical book. The author was an unfit, overweight woman who got fit, and unfortunately I gave this up at 27%, at which point the author had only been for one half-hearted run, and I felt like it didn't really do what it purported to do in the blurb, so I'm afraid for me this was a 1 star and I wouldn't recommend it. Next up, this was a reread for me, The Island by Victoria Hislop. I first read it many years ago when it first came out, and I gave this, I can't remember what I gave this actually, because I haven't got it in this graphic, have I? I think it was 4 stars. It's a historical novel set in a leper colony on a small island called Spinalonga off the coast of Greece, I think off the coast of Crete actually, and just really lovely characters, really vibrant descriptions of Greece, and a really great storyline. So yeah, the one that I'd highly recommend. Next was book 5, which is 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. I saw this talked about a lot on TikTok and also on YouTube a little bit as well. And unfortunately, as soon as I got into the storyline of this, I decided not to continue reading it for personal reasons. I'm going to put up the next slide now, which gives away some of the storyline and the reason why I didn't read it. So if you don't want to know that, look away now. Next book I read was Elevate Your Life at Home by Jennifer Melville. The tagline of this book says, inspiring ideas to add joy, peace and magic to your home life. And I gave this just 2.5 stars. It was an okay read. It was a little bit repetitive. It wasn't long and there were a few nice ideas in it, but I didn't really get a lot from it. So yeah, only 2.5 stars from me. Next book I read was Cabin Fever by Michael Smith and Jonathan Franklin, and this was the true account of a cruise ship at the beginning of COVID. They did lots of interviews with various people and put a book together about the crew and the passengers and what happened to people and to the ship itself, and it was a really interesting read, slightly terrifying, but yeah, absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed this and I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, book number 8 was The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. She's one of my favourite authors. I love almost everything she's written, and I gave this 5 stars. It was set in America during the Great Depression and is the story of one family's struggle to find a better life and all the hardships they went through. Absolutely loved it. Great characters, really good storyline, gripping, and I felt like I learnt a lot from it as well. The next book I read, number 9, was The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This was a really good murder mystery, and it was a bit different because it was written in the form of emails and messages and voicemails, that sort of thing. So it was very easy to read, a great storyline, and set in an English village with a big cast of characters. So I enjoyed this one and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next one wasn't so popular, I'm afraid. This was book number 10 and it was The Power by Naomi Alderman. I only gave this 1 star because I didn't finish it. I'm usually a big fan of sort of futuristic dystopian fiction, but I just didn't connect with this one at all. I found it very hard going. I didn't enjoy the style of writing, didn't like the characters or the plot, so I'm afraid I gave it up and only gave it 1 star. This would not be one that I would recommend. The next one wasn't great either. I only gave this one 2.5 stars. Weirdly, this was one of 2 books I read this year with the same title, The Hike. This one was by Susie Holiday. It's the second of her books I've read, and I haven't much liked either of them, so I won't be reading anything else by her. But this was sort of a murder adventure psychological thriller type thing. 4 main characters, they were all utterly dislikable, completely morally bankrupt, and I said in my little mini review that if my mother was talking about this book, it's the type of thing she'd call a pot boiler. I did manage to get to the end of it, but I didn't really rate it, I'm afraid. Next on my list was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, which is, it sounds like not particularly nice subject matter. It's about a schoolgirl who has an affair with her much older male teacher. And it was very compelling, but also weirdly not that engaging at the same time. I did find it a little bit boring as well. It followed her life sort of through from when she's having the affair with the teacher beforehand and then onwards into later life and how it affects her. I gave it 3 stars and I didn't hate it at all. I mean, it kept me reading right till the end. But yeah, huge trigger warnings for sexual abuse and grooming, so just sort of buyer beware on that score. Next, things picked up a bit with book number 13. This was Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. I hope I've pronounced that right. This is, I'm not usually a fan of a ghost story, but this was very much a supernatural book. It's about a girl who goes and takes a summer job as a nanny to a young boy, and strange things start taking place. I gave this 5 stars. It was one of my reads of the year, this, and I also passed it on to Ashley, who is a big fan of ghost stories, after I finished it, and he loved it as well. Just very different, very readable, well written, interesting characters, and really twisty turny. So even if you're not normally a fan of the supernatural, I think you might well enjoy this like I did. This book was so disappointing to me. I was really looking forward to reading it. I love a World War II book, and I love particularly about female spies, any fiction on that score. But side note, if you want a really good World War II female spy book, Codename Verity is exceptional. One of the best books I've ever read in my life. This one I didn't finish, I'm afraid. I only gave it 2 stars. I've written in my little review there, too much extraneous detail. My God, there was a lot of extra detail, unnecessary detail that I didn't need to wade through, and too many Americanisms in speech by non-American characters to make this believable as a historical novel. One of my pet hates is when characters speak in a way that wouldn't be true to how they spoke. It's particularly in books set in a particular period of history or a certain country. I really don't like that. It really does spoil my enjoyment of the book. So this would not be one I'd recommend. Book number 15 was Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm a big fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think this was one of the books she wrote in her younger days, and I only gave this one 3.5 stars, I'm afraid. It was okay. It was a sliding doors style romance, but definitely not as good as her more recent books that she's written as she's got a bit older. I found this just a little bit chiclety for my taste. Next one was Hear Me Out by Sarah Harding. This caught my eye in the local library and I picked it up. And I enjoyed reading this. Sarah Harding was a member of Girls Aloud who very sadly died of breast cancer a year or so ago, I think. And I enjoyed this, hearing her recollections of her life, but obviously it was very sadly cut short by cancer, but an enjoyable read nonetheless. I did give this 4 stars. I've never yet been disappointed by a Kelly Rimmer book. I think she's a great author, and this was Truths I Never Told You. This was book number 17. It's a family story, and it was set sort of in a dual time frame, 1958 and 1996, around a moral dilemma, as several of her books are, and it was historically really good and also very thought-provoking as well. I don't want to say too much about the plot, mostly because I can't remember it because I read it in March or April, I think. But yeah, I gave this one 4 stars and very much enjoyed it. I'm ashamed to say that I can remember absolutely nothing about this, The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell, but I do know that I love Lisa Jewell as an author, This was book number 18. I gave it 5 stars, and my review said, brilliant domestic noir thriller by one of my favourite authors, and kept me up way after my bedtime as I couldn't stop reading just one more chapter. So that's a good review in itself, despite the fact I can't remember the details of the story. Anything that actually manages to keep me up after my bedtime must be good. This was another fun, quirky little read. It was called Adrift, The Curious Tale of the Lego Lost at Sea by Tracy Williams. It's another book that I found in the library. I love going to the library because you see books that you'd never think of, or, you know, you find new books that catch your eye and look so interesting. And this one really was fun and quirky and thought-provoking. It also had some really nice illustrations in it. I don't read many books with illustrations, but absolutely fascinating and entertaining read about Lego that gets washed ashore in various places, and thought-provoking in terms of plastic in our oceans as well. Gave it 4 stars. The next book was One Summer in Crete by Nadia Marks, and I listened to this on audio. I've never been much for audiobooks, but I decided to really make an effort to get into them this year and use my long car journeys, which I do quite a lot of, to listen to books. And this was a nice, easy, chick lit style read, set in Greece, and it took me there, honestly. The story was okay, but just the descriptions of Greece and the sunshine and the food were just lovely, and I very much enjoyed listening to it. I gave it 3 stars. This next read was my very first Fiona Cummins book, but it definitely won't be my last. This was book number 35. I think I'm doing these in the wrong order, I've just realised, but never mind, we'll just go with it. This was about a GP and his wife, and there was a grisly murder of the pair of them, and it turned out to be they had 2 daughters. One was 10 and one was 12 at the time, and one of their daughters was sent away to prison for their murder, or not prison, whatever they send children to at that age. And it's about what actually happened on that night, and it was really, really good. Very enjoyable. I liked it a lot. It was well written and great characters. 4 stars for this one. We're back to the right order now. I'm just going to leave it in the wrong order because it doesn't really matter what order they're in, and this is very fiddly to do. Next was "'Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas" by Adam Kay. I enjoyed this just as much as I enjoyed his 2 previous books about his adventures as a junior doctor in the NHS. It was a bit short, this one, I have to say. I only paid 99p for it on Kindle, so I was quite glad that I hadn't paid a lot. But brilliant writing, some sad moments, some hilarious moments, but yes, altogether very enjoyable. Would recommend. Next up was Someone Else's Shoes by Jojo Moyes. I really like Jojo Moyes' books. She writes great characters who you really find yourself rooting for, and I think you'd probably call it, I'm not sure it's chick lit, it's probably in that direction, but more female fiction, I guess. I'm probably not allowed to give genders to fiction these days, but there we are, I just did. But yeah, really great tale of women supporting can't get my words out. Great tale of women supporting women. This one, I enjoyed it. Next book was Takeaway by Angela Huey. I saw this recommended on BookTube, and I thought it sounded really interesting. The recollections and memories of a British Chinese girl brought up in a Chinese takeaway in, I can't remember if it was the 70s or the 80s, but yeah, around that time anyway. Unfortunately, after the first 100 pages, I just found it getting really repetitive and I wasn't enjoying it. I felt like it could have been a lot shorter. It wasn't awful, but I just had enough, so I didn't finish it. Next was The Only Suspect by Louise Candlish. I very much enjoyed this. Another of my favourite authors. Other than her really early stuff, I think she writes really good books, and I enjoy almost everything she puts out. I'm looking forward to her new book, which is coming out in June, I believe. This one was 4 stars. I said a great twisty-turny thriller, and it would have been 4.5 stars if I hadn't guessed one of the twists early on, but still well worth the read. I enjoyed it. Next up was Dreamland by Rosa Rankin G. This was a dystopian novel set in the near future in a world that was devastated by overpopulation and climate change, and it was very scarily believable but really well written. And the ending was a little bit disappointing, so I did knock it down to 4 stars, but this was my read of the month for whichever month it was that I read it in. I can't remember now. Oh, this one was a really good one. Her Perfect Twin by Sarah Bonner. This was a really twisty sort of psychological thriller set during the pandemic. If you like a sort of twisty murder, revenge, psycho villains and some oh my god moments, I think I put in this review, you will definitely enjoy this one. Well worth a read. I gave this one 4 stars. My second Kristin Hannah book of the year, this one was Between Sisters, and I gave this one 4 stars. It was a family drama. It was full of love, loss, grief, redemption, and you know that you're really invested in a book and the characters when you're really desperate for them to have a happy ending. Yeah, really enjoyed this one. I highly recommend. Next up was Heads You Win by Jeffrey Archer. I do like a Jeffrey Archer book. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It was a very involved political thriller, and it was the type of book that I felt like it was difficult to keep track of what was going on because there was so much. It went back and forth in time and a lot of twists and turns. I felt like it would be a great book to read on holiday when you can really concentrate and read in big chunks. It didn't lend itself well to being picked up and put down regularly, which is how I generally read when I'm not on holiday, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Next was Pieces of You by Ella Harper. This I've had on my Kindle for absolutely ages, and I decided to read it. It said it was a bittersweet love story. Oh my goodness, it was so miserable. Misery heaped upon misery. I only gave it 2 stars and definitely wouldn't recommend. Not an uplifting read. This was my second book entitled The Hike. This version was by Lucy Clark and was my 28th book of the year. I gave it 4 stars. It was considerably better than the other book called The Hike, and it was a dark thriller set in Norway, rugged Norwegian mountains, 4 female friends at the centre of it. A little bit far-fetched occasionally, but you can forgive it when it's a good story that keeps you turning the pages. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. What Lies Between Us by John Marrs is up there with my favourite books of the year, and I gave it 5 stars. It was such a good psychological thriller. You weren't really sure what was going to happen next. It was twist after twist. Really enjoyed it. Centred around a woman and her elderly mother, and what you think you know what's happening, and it just changes every moment. Such a really good book. Next was The Woman in My Home by Carrie Fisher. Again, this was a 5-star read, a really good plot, great characters, fast-paced, really enjoyed it. It's the 3rd book I've read by Carrie Fisher, and I've enjoyed all of them. The next book was The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, and I do love when I go on holiday to read a book set in the place that I'm on holiday in, and this, bizarrely, during our cruise to the Norwegian fields in June, was set in a cruise ship in Norway, so that ticked the box really well, and I enjoyed this and gave it 4 stars. Next up was The Light We Lost by Jill Santopolo. This was book 32 of 2023, and I gave it 4 stars. It was a love triangle romance. It was a little bit on the over-romancy side, but it was pretty good. I enjoyed it overall. I thought it was thought-provoking, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I liked it. In the world of reading, there is little that is more disappointing than a book that starts out really well and then just peters out, and this unfortunately was one of those. It was Tuesday Falling by S. Williams, and it was a crime thriller set in London. As I said, it started really well, but it just petered out. I gave up at 65% because I just didn't care enough to finish it. Very disappointing, 2 stars. Book number 34 was After the End by Claire Mackintosh. This is the 3rd of her books I've read, and I really must read more in the new year by Claire Mackintosh because I think she's a brilliant author. This one I gave 4.5 stars to. It's an incredibly moving book about parents who have to make the most awful decision about their sick child's future. Really well written, really believable, very engaging, and I should issue a serious trigger warning for childhood illness here, so if that's not something that's your bag, I wouldn't recommend this one, but I very, very much enjoyed this. Also recommended this to my mum, who read it as well, and again very much enjoyed it. This was such a good read. It's called The Reluctant Carer and the subtitle is Dispatches from the Edge of Life. It hasn't got an author attributed to it. It's an autobiographical book written by a chap who talks about caring for his elderly parents, and you know that as that change comes when from being a child to a parent yourself, almost it switches around, doesn't it? And it really resonated with me. This book, it came to me at the right time. I listened to it on audio while I was driving, and it's really stayed with me, this book. It was a 5-star read, and I would highly recommend this to anybody at my stage of life. This book, number 40, The Angel Tree by Lucinda Riley, was a recommendation from my mum. It's a family saga, spans from the period of 1945 to the 80s. Really enjoyable, very much enjoyed this one. A little bit of mystery thrown in there as well, and some great characters. I think I've read Lucinda Riley books before, but not for a long time. So yes, I'd recommend this one. I gave it 4 stars. Next was Many Different Kinds of Love by Michael Rosen, and the subtitle of this is A Story of Life and Death in the NHS, and it is the story of his real life experiences of being a COVID patient in a UK hospital during the pandemic. I wanted to like this more than I liked it. I gave it 3 stars, but I found it a little bit repetitive and not that engaging, but parts of it were very moving, but unfortunately overall not my favourite at all of the year. I do love a Sharon Bolton thriller, and The Pact really hit the spot for me. It was about 6 friends, and they make a pact in a moment of madness in the summer after their A-levels when they're 18, and that pact comes back to haunt them 20 years later. It was a real gripping page-turner, and I gave this one 5 stars. Another really good thriller writer, T.M. Logan. This one was The Curfew, and this starts with every parent's nightmare. They're waiting up for their teenage son to come home, and he misses his curfew, and it's about what happens after that. Really good thriller, real page turner. I gave this one 4 stars. Next up was The Secret Midwife. Again, I listened to this on Audible, and actually it's not Audible at all, it's BorrowBox from the library, but on audio I should say. This was a really thought-provoking book. It was autobiographical and about the highs and lows of NHS midwifery in the 21st century and how things have changed, and not necessarily for the better, but a very good book, really enjoyed it. If you're interested at all in midwifery and birth, that might be one for you. The cover of this next book, Woman of a Certain Rage by Georgie Hall, made me think it was going to be a light, humorous, entertaining read, which was what I needed at the point I picked it up. But it actually wasn't so much. It was quite a thought-provoking novel about changes in lives and relationships for women in midlife. And I did enjoy it, but it wasn't really what I was expecting at the time. I did give it 4 stars. Next up was my second Sharon Bolton thriller of the year. This one was The Split, and it was really good, twisty and turny, very pacey, partially set in the Falkland Islands, and yeah, very enjoyable again. Another 4-star read from Sharon Bolton. Book number 47 was The Maid by Nita Prose, and I enjoyed this so much more than I thought I was going to. It was a real good old-fashioned locked room mystery with, I've written here, a quirky neurodiverse protagonist, which is exactly what it was. Really good. I enjoyed it very much. I really liked Molly, the main character, and it was just a bit different from a lot of other things that I've read recently. So yeah, very much enjoyed this. I'd recommend it if you are into something a little bit different and fun. Next was Will You Remember Me by Amanda Prowse. Now, I normally like Amanda Prowse books. I'd say she writes family drama generally. However, I didn't realise this one was actually a sequel to one of her earlier books, and also it was a little bit depressing. I didn't love this one. I gave it 3 stars, but possibly my own fault for not realising it was a sequel to start with. A Husband's Confession by Zoe Miller was another of these books that had been sitting on my Kindle unread for ages, so I decided that this year would be the year I read it. It was a family drama set in Ireland, great characters, full of secrets and lies, definitely worth a read. I gave it 4 stars. Adele Parks is one of my favourite authors, and I saved this one for my holiday in October. It's called One Last Secret and was my 50th book of the year. Ended up giving this 5 stars. It's the story of Dora, who's a high-class escort, and she agrees to do one last job before settling down with the man of her dreams and living a normal life, but all is not as it seems. Really good thriller. Next up was one of my top 3 books of the year. It was The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Again, this had been on my Kindle for ages. I think the reason I had avoided reading this until now was it's so blimmin' long, but I've seen so many good things about it, so I decided to get stuck in. And it's a massive Irish epic. It took me a while to get into it, but I did end up absolutely loving it. And the story has stayed with me. It's come back to me. I've thought about it a lot, which is a sign of a really good book, isn't it? That you think about it again after you've finished. I would recommend this to anybody. Just such a good book. Oh my goodness, this one was a little bit of a disappointment. It was Nine Perfect Strangers by Liane Moriarty, and it's sort of weird goings on at a health retreat. It started okay, but it sort of slowed down halfway through and never regained enough momentum for me. I thought it was rubbish, to be honest. It was so far-fetched and just got more and more far-fetched as time went on. I think I was fairly generous in my star rating of this. Looking back, I think it really only deserved 2.5. Oh my goodness, this was such a good book. I'm not going to be able to give it do it justice in a 30-second review, but it was part crime thriller, part social commentary, sort of about the media and how we live our lives these days. It's about a missing child, essentially, and it was utterly involving. I couldn't put it down. I gave it 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it. Oh, this one was disappointing. I really wanted to like it. I've read some of Ali McNamara's books before, and this was Step Back in Time. It was sort of a time travel chick litty romance, but I was just so bored. I couldn't get through it. I gave it 2 stars because I got about halfway through, but again, I just lost interest and wanted to move on to something that would involve me a bit more. One Day in December by Josie Silver was next, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. It was a quirky romance set over a number of years with some really great characters who I was really rooting for. Next up was The Echo Chamber by John Boyne. I wanted to read some more of his work, having enjoyed The Heart's Invisible Furies so much back in October. And I felt like this was a bit overlong, to be honest. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was very clever, and it was a satirical look at life in the 21st century, centred on one utterly unlikable family. But it did have some thought-provoking stuff about wokeness and society and the way we live our lives and phones and screens. Yeah, worth a read, but unfortunately didn't live up to the heights of the first one of his I read this year. This next one, Jump by Daniela Moyles, was a very last-minute pick from what was available on BorrowBox for some driving I was doing. I wanted something to listen to, and yeah, it wasn't great. It was sort of marketed as a travel book, but it was a bit Eat, Pray, Love for me. If you've watched that or read it, you'll know what I mean. Yeah, I think I wrote in the review, a bit more travel and a bit less navel gazing would be good. So it wasn't really for me. There's a lot of sort of angstiness and that sort of thing, which I wasn't really looking for. I was looking for a rompy travel read, really. All the Broken Places by John Boyne was my final John Boyne of the year, and book number 58 of the year, I believe. This was the sequel to The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which I didn't realise because I've always actively avoided The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas in the past because based on the content, I didn't particularly want to read or watch it. That being said, I did actually enjoy this book. It took me a while to get into again. I think his books do take me a while to get into, but I enjoyed the content of this. It was based around later life after the Second World War and how it impacted people's lives, or the specific characters' lives later on. It was the sister of the boy in the striped pyjamas, Gretel. I've only just finished it and I've forgotten her name already. Anyway, that is it. That is a romp through the 58 books I've read this year, and I'm hoping to get to 60 before the end of the year. I hope you enjoyed that. I know these I know these videos aren't for everybody, but I've enjoyed making it and talking about what I've read. I'm a passionate reader, as you know, so I hope those of you who also are have found something useful in this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.